One of the most significant challenges the press faces, of course, is economic. Besieged by a fractured media landscape and rapidly changing technology, newspapers have been forced to adapt or die. Some have adapted, but many have died. One area where it's particularly troubling to me is smaller markets in mid-size and smaller cities. In those areas, local newspapers have been the glue that keeps communities informed and stitched together. I've seen it in cities in upstate New York, small and middle-sized. Big companies have left. Some of the community banks have been bought up by major large banks. And the things that keep a community together are greatly deteriorating. Newspapers are one of the few glues these communities have. They are vital, way beyond the profit and loss that they might make. The external benefits of these newspapers, as the economists would say, are large. But they're in trouble because of all the economic issues I mentioned. Now there's a new threat on the horizon. A few weeks ago, a hedge fund, known as the destroyer of newspapers, announced a bid to take over Gannett, which, in addition to USA Today, publishes a lot of small and medium-sized newspapers and 4 important papers in my state: the Democrat and Chronicle in Rochester, the Press and Sun in Binghamton, the Journal in Poughkeepsie, the Journal News in Westchester, and newspapers in Elmira and Ithaca. On the front page of the Washington Post this morning is an article about the business practices of Alden and its subsidiaries. Essentially, Alden's strategy is to buy up newspapers, cut staff, and then sell the commercial real estate of newsrooms and printing presses for profits. The article quotes several experts who have said of Alden, quote, "They are the ultimate cash flow mercenary. They want to find cash flow and bleed it to death. Their principle is, quote, no new investment and sell off what you can while you can, according to analysts who study them." An analysis of the newspapers owned by Alden revealed that they cut newspaper staff at more than twice the rate of competitors. And it's in all likelihood, when they sell the real estate, the vast majority of the money does not go to revitalizing newspapers, as the newspaper itself would do when it sells real estate, but goes elsewhere. For Alden Global Capital, the hedge fund, the acquisition and streamlining of Gannett papers might increase its profits a couple of percentage points, but the loss of the Press and Sun and Democrat and Chronicle would be incalculable. Let me ask the American people, and every one of my colleagues here, what's more important, having our newspapers, which are so important to local communities, go on, or having a hedge fund raise its market profits by 5 points if they're public, or by a certain amount? What is more important? I would argue the newspapers. I would argue the newspapers. The Gannett Consortium was already the result of consolidated news business. One reporter working multiple beats, placing stories in multiple newspapers. I've seen that in upstate New York. What was already an unburdened, undersourced operation now faces potential annihilation by an indifferent media conglomerate backed by an even more indifferent hedge fund. Well, what do we do about this? I don't know how to solve the broader economic problem for newspapers, big and small. I hope there is one. But the only antidote to these problems I have seen is the rarer and rarer presence of generous, civic-minded families and new individuals who own news outlets for the right reasons, not simply to maximize profits, although profit is still important, but because they feel an obligation to advance journalism for the greater benefit of us all. Everyone's seen this work at flagship newspapers, but the family model has worked in smaller markets as well, including several papers in upstate New York. So I would propose that charitably inclined institutions and individuals should begin to think of journalism as a philanthropic endeavor. If it becomes a worthy endeavor to buy a local newspaper and preserve its size and independence, just as it is a worthy endeavor to support the local hospital, school, charity, many more might consider doing it. As Americans, we must continue to support the First Amendment, the freedom and viability of the press. Our democracy depends on it. I yield the floor.